The fog rolled through the streets of Hollowgrave like a living ghost. It wrapped around the iron lamps and carriages, turning the night into a dream half remembered. Some said it carried whispers, echoes of prayers, and promises long broken. But on this particular evening, the fog carried something else, something breathing, watching, waiting. Evelyn Ashbourne walked alone, her boots brushed against cobblestones, still slick with the day's rain, her gloved hand clutching a small parcel, a bouquet of pressed violets tied in silver thread. They were for her sister's grave, though she had no words left to speak to the dead. The city slept behind closed curtains, but Evelyn always felt safer in the silence, safer among the forgotten. She was not meant for the noise of daylight, not anymore. The lamplight trembled as she passed beneath it. Her reflection followed in a puddle, pale and uncertain, as though the woman she had become was still learning to recognize herself. The sickness that had taken her father, the debts left behind, the long hours of sewing and silence. They had carved the girl out of her and left only quiet resolve. And yet, as the church bell tolled midnight, she heard it. Footsteps, behind her, measured, slow, too steady to be the wind. Evelyn turned, her heart folding in on itself, but the fog only stared back. For a moment, she thought she saw a shape, tall, motionless, but it faded, and she told herself she was foolish. Hollowgrave was filled with phantoms, most of them human. Still, she walked faster. The footsteps followed. She turned again, ready to call out, when a voice, low and clear as velvet, slipped through the mist. "You shouldn't walk alone at this hour." It came from somewhere behind her, calm, almost tender, yet it made her pulse tremble. Evelyn froze, fingers tightening around the violets. When she spoke, her voice came small and cracked. "Who are you?" The fog shifted, and he stepped into view. A man, if a man he could be called, stood in the lantern glow. His coat was dark, finely cut, the collar turned high against his throat. Hair black as wet ink fell across a face too pale, too still. His eyes, impossibly beautifully wrong, held the faintest trace of silver, like moonlight caught beneath water. "A stranger," he said softly, "nothing more." But there was something in the way he looked at her, as if her soul had been waiting for him to arrive. And in that gaze, Evelyn felt both fear and familiarity, the cruel twin sensations that often heralded fate. That night, she dreamt of him. In the dream, the fog became a ballroom, silent and endless, where she waltzed with a shadow that never aged. His hands were cold, his touch careful, as if she might break. Every step echoed with her heartbeat, and when she looked up, she saw the silver eyes again. He leaned close. "When you find me again," he whispered, "remember this." When she woke, dawn had not yet come. Only the fog remained. Days turned to weeks. The stranger did not return, and Evelyn told herself he was a trick of sleeplessness. But Hollowgrave had a way of keeping its secrets near. Every evening, the air seemed thicker, heavier, and every night the same dream returned. Each time, the ballroom felt closer to real. Each time, she woke with a strange ache in her chest, as if she had left something behind in the dream. Then came the night of the storm. Evelyn had stayed late at the tailor's shop, mending uniforms by candlelight. When she finally stepped outside, the wind had risen, tossing the fog into spirals. The city felt unmoored, lost between centuries. She wrapped her shawl tighter and hurried through the alley, when lightning split the sky, illuminating a figure standing at the far end. The stranger. He was exactly as before, unaged, untouched by the weather. And this time, he was not watching her. He was waiting. "You came back," she breathed. "Greater than I never left," he answered, voice low. "I only waited until you remembered." His words felt like déjà vu, and her heart answered before her mind could stop it. Somewhere inside, she already knew him. That was how it began, not with love, but with recognition, a memory too old to belong to either of them. And though Evelyn did not yet know his name, the fog already whispered it, Orin Vallemont, a name older than Hollowgrave itself. The days that followed the storm felt unreal. The fog no longer frightened Evelyn. It waited for her. Every street she crossed, every lamplight that flickered felt like a memory, whispering just beneath her skin. She went about her work in silence, her needle dancing through fabric, yet her thoughts wandered endlessly toward the man she met in the mist. Orin Vallemont. She hadn't spoken his name aloud, and yet it echoed inside her as if it had always belonged there. At night, she dreamt again. Not of ballrooms this time, but of gardens, a garden trapped beneath glass, where the flowers bloomed without scent, their petals glimmering faintly like frost. Orin stood among them, untouched by their beauty, watching as one by one the flowers turned to ash in his hands, and she always woke before she could ask him why. One evening, unable to resist the pull any longer, Evelyn found herself walking beyond the city's edge, to the place where Hollowgrave gave way to wild meadows and forgotten manors. The fog here was different, softer, almost silver in hue. It clung to the ground like breath. It was there she saw him again. He stood beneath the remnants of an iron gate, one hand resting on the rusted arch. His black coat fluttered in the wind, and though the sun was dying on the horizon, his skin caught no warmth. He looked like a memory the world had refused to let go. Greater than, "You found me?" he said quietly. "I wasn't looking," Evelyn lied. Orin smiled faintly. "No one ever does. They simply arrive." His voice was calm, distant, as though speaking to her from another time. Yet when his eyes met hers, the air thickened between them. She felt the same strange ache that haunted her dreams, the sense that every step toward him was a step closer to something she had once feared and once loved. "What is this place?" she asked. "A house," he murmured, "and a grave for all the things I could not save." He led her through the gate. The path wound through an overgrown garden where no flowers bloomed, yet everything shimmered faintly under the dying light. The air smelled of rain and something older, like parchment and sorrow. Statues lined the path, angels without faces, lovers frozen in farewell, children holding wilted roses. Each stone seemed to weep with moss and time. Evelyn's footsteps echoed faintly, and she could not tell whether it was her heart or the wind that trembled. At the garden's center stood a glass house, vast and ghostly, its panes fogged with age. Inside, vines twined around the pillars, pale blossoms blooming from roots that should have long turned to dust. "This garden shouldn't exist," she whispered. "It doesn't," he replied. "Not anymore." He stepped into the glass house, the light bending strangely around him. Evelyn followed, her breath misting the air. Inside, the world felt still, trapped between life and death. The air hummed faintly, like the last note of a forgotten melody. Orin turned to her, his silver eyes catching the light. "Once," he said, "this garden belonged to someone I loved. She wished for eternal beauty, and I gave it to her. But eternity, Evelyn," his voice faltered, and for a heartbeat he looked utterly human. "Eternity rots." Evelyn's throat tightened. What happened to her? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached toward one of the ghostly blossoms. As his fingers brushed the petal, it withered instantly, curling into ash that drifted to the floor like gray snow. "Everything I touch remembers death," he said softly. Evelyn felt a chill that was not from the air. She wanted to speak, to ask who he really was, but before she could, thunder murmured in the distance. The fog outside had thickened again, pressing against the glass like a tide. Orin turned away, his voice almost a whisper. "You should leave before night falls. Will I see you again?" she asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. He smiled faintly, a smile that belonged to centuries, not moments. "You already do, every time you dream." That night, Evelyn dreamt of the garden again, but this time there was no glass, no walls, just endless flowers turning to ash beneath the pale moonlight. And at the center, Orrin stood with his back to her, holding a single black rose. When she called his name, he turned, but his eyes were no longer silver. They were red as sorrow, and somewhere a whisper spoke. He was never meant to love again. Morning broke in Hollowgrave like a fading candle, weak, reluctant, and too fragile to chase the fog away. Evelyn had promised herself she would stay home, that she would forget the garden and its sorrowful keeper. But promises, she had learned, were like petals in the wind, beautiful until touched. By dusk her feet were already on the road to Valemont Manor. The iron gate greeted her with a low groan, as though the house itself sighed at her return. The air hung heavy with rain and memory. Every stone along the path seemed to remember her steps from the night before. When she reached the door, it opened without her touch. "You shouldn't be here," a voice whispered, though it came not from a man but from the walls themselves. Evelyn hesitated, heart trembling. "Orrin?" she called softly. No reply, only the slow drip of water from the roof, the faint rustle of curtains moving without wind. She stepped inside. The interior was a cathedral of dust and moonlight. Faded tapestries hung from tall walls, depicting scenes of lovers beneath blood-red moons. The chandeliers above were veiled in cobweb lace, and in the hearth, the ashes of a long dead fire still held the faint scent of roses. Orrin was nowhere to be seen, and yet she felt him in every echo, every flicker, every quiet breath the house dared to exhale. She began to wander. Each hallway seemed to stretch further than it should, turning upon itself like a dream. She passed closed doors that seemed to hum faintly, and when she glanced back, some of them stood slightly ajar. Something, or someone, was watching her. She found herself drawn toward a narrow staircase, spiraling downward. The steps creaked like sighs, and faint music rose from below. A melody so fragile she thought it must be her imagination. At the bottom, a corridor stretched into shadow. Candles burned on their own, their flames pale blue. The walls were lined with portraits, each face lost to time, except one, a woman in a gown of silver, her eyes soft and distant. Evelyn froze. She knew that face. It was hers, or rather, who she might have been centuries ago. The resemblance was undeniable. The same mouth, the same gaze, even the same faint scar along the collarbone. But this woman was not Evelyn Ashbourne. The plaque below the portrait read a different name: Isolde Valemont, beloved of Orrin, 1741. Her breath caught, the world spinning in silence. Orrin had lived through centuries and loved this woman. But how could she, Evelyn, carry her face? The music grew louder. "You shouldn't have come here." His voice came from behind her now. Evelyn turned slowly. Orrin stood in the corridor's half-light, his expression unreadable. Not anger, but grief. His eyes were shadowed, his posture rigid, as though bracing against pain. "Who is she?" Evelyn whispered. "Why does she look like me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence darkening the air between them. "Because," he said finally, "you are the echo she left behind." She tried to speak, but his words sank deeper than thought. Orrin's gaze softened. "The curse bound me to her soul, not her life. Every century when the moon turns red, she returns, always with a different name, a different life, a different death waiting at the end of it." Evelyn felt the world collapse quietly around her. You think I'm her? No, he murmured. You are what remains of her. The part that still believes love can undo death. The air grew cold. Candles flickered. Shadows stretched across the walls. The portrait of Isolde seemed to shift, her painted eyes glimmering faintly, as though alive. Evelyn's voice broke. If I'm truly her, what happens to me? Oren's answer was a whisper and a confession. The same thing that happens every time I remember her. You fade. He stepped back, as if distance could save her, but the truth between them had already bound tighter than any curse. Evelyn reached for him. Then what happens to you? Oren's eyes shone, a flicker of sorrow within silver light. I remain. I always remain. The music stopped. The candles went out, and in the silence the house seemed to breathe, as though relieved to see the past begin again. Evelyn looked at Oren one last time, her heart breaking under the weight of something she could not name. You said eternity rots? She whispered. Then why do you stay? Oren's reply was almost too soft to hear, because every time she returns, I hope she'll remember how to end it. Outside, the fog swallowed the manor whole. Inside, the house settled into silence once more, waiting, listening, remembering. And somewhere deep within its walls, a rose began to bloom again, its petals black as midnight. The night fell heavy upon Valemont Manor. The fog that had once whispered through the garden now pressed against the windows like a living thing, eager to come inside. In the faint glow of the hearth, Evelyn sat before Oren, her hands trembling in her lap. Tell me the truth, she said. Tell me what you are. Oren turned toward the fire, his face half in shadow. For a long while he said nothing. Then with a sigh that seemed centuries old, he began, I was born when the moon was red, Oren said, in a time when faith and fear walked hand in hand. He spoke of a small village buried deep in the Carpathian hills, where winters lasted too long and the stars felt too close. He had once been human, a poet, a dreamer, and the son of a healer. His mother had eyes the color of stormlight, eyes that the villagers feared. They said she saw what should not be seen. When she died, they burned her house, calling it cleansing. Oren was only 17. He watched the flames devour everything he loved. That night, as the ashes rose into the red moon, a stranger appeared at his door, a woman cloaked in silver. She told me my grief could end, he whispered, that she could make me eternal. Her name was Isolde Valemont, the same woman whose face now lived on Evelyn's. Isolde had been a noble woman, cursed to walk the earth until she found someone who would love her after death. She promised Oren power, beauty, and the end of pain. All she asked in return was his blood, and his promise to never leave her. He agreed. The ritual took place beneath the blood moon, surrounded by roses that bled sap instead of dew. She cut her palm and pressed it to his lips. When he drank, the world shattered. The stars went out. The night swallowed him whole. I woke the next morning, Oren said, and the sun no longer burned me. The river showed no reflection. My heart beat only when she looked at me. He became her eternal companion, her shadow, her curse, her salvation. For 100 years they danced through centuries, through wars and kingdoms. But love, when bound by eternity, begins to rot. She grew cruel, Oren said quietly. Her hunger deepened. Every night she took more from me, my warmth, my laughter, my soul, until one dawn I saw what I had become. His eyes, silver, luminous, lifeless, stared into the fire. I killed her. The words fell like a blade, but death did not end her. It only shifted the burden. When I struck her down, Oren said, the curse clung to me instead. Her blood bound to mine. Every century she returns, not as herself, but reborn. Her spirit finds a new body, a new name. And he paused, I am doomed to love her again, to lose her again. Forever, Evelyn's breath caught. The fire hissed and dimmed, the light trembling across Oren's face. So when you saw me, she whispered, you already knew. Oren nodded. I felt her the moment you stepped into the garden. The way you looked at the roses, the way you smiled. Evelyn's voice broke. Then what happens now? Oren looked at her, eyes soft, tired, almost human. Now the curse begins again. Unless, he stopped. Unless what? Unless you choose to break it. Evelyn's hands tightened in her lap. How? By remembering who you were. By remembering what you did. Her heart raced. What I did? Oren nodded. The curse was born from betrayal. It can only end when the one who began it accepts the truth. Evelyn shook her head. But I don't remember any of it. You will, Oren said. The moon is turning red again. When it does, the memories will come. The fire died out. Only the moonlight remained, spilling through the tall windows like liquid silver. Evelyn rose slowly, her reflection vanishing in the glass as the light touched her face. And if I remember, she asked. Oren looked at her with the sorrow of 1,000 lifetimes. Then one of us will die, and the other will finally sleep. Outside, thunder rolled through Hollowgrave. The roses in the garden began to open all at once, their petals glistening with blood. The moon rose higher, pale, vast, and cruel. And in its light, Evelyn felt the first whisper of another life, a voice calling from centuries past. Oren, you promised me forever. The night returned heavy with silence, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The manor stood still beneath the rising blood moon, every stone glinting faintly red, every window trembling under the weight of some ancient, unseen truth. Evelyn woke with a gasp. Her candle had gone out, yet the room glowed faintly, lit not by fire, but by the silver shimmer leaking through the curtains. Her pulse echoed in her ears, too loud, too alive. She could feel something stirring, like a name whispered through her bones. Oren, she breathed, but even as she spoke it, the name felt older. It tasted like another life. She rose and crossed the room. The floorboards sighed beneath her feet as if sighing in memory. On the vanity sat an oval mirror, tarnished, framed in blackened gold. It had been there since she arrived at Valamont Manor, yet she had never dared to look into it. Tonight, the mirror shimmered. Her reflection blinked once and didn't blink back. Instead, the reflection smiled faintly. Its eyes were darker, older, filled with sorrow that stretched across lifetimes. You remember me, the reflection said. Evelyn stumbled back, breath catching. Who are you? I am who you were, the reflection whispered. I am Isolde. The glass rippled like water. Evelyn pressed her palm against it, and the moment she touched the surface, the room dissolved. The world around her bled into moonlight and roses. She stood in the garden, not as Evelyn, but as someone else. Her gown shimmered like starlight. Her hands were pale and slender, and when she looked down, a silver ring glimmered on her finger. The air smelled of rain and blood. Oren stood before her, younger, human, beautiful, in a way that defied mercy. His smile trembled as he reached for her. Isolde, he said softly, promise me this. No matter what happens, you'll never leave me. She remembered now. The ache of that night, the fear of growing old while he remained untouched by time. I can't, she whispered. You are of shadow, I am of flesh. Then let me make you eternal. He pressed a dagger into her hand, silver, carved with runes. If you love me, he said, spill your blood under the red moon, and you will never die. And she, foolish, desperate, aching with love, obeyed. Her blood fell upon the roses, and they bloomed black. The earth trembled, The moon burned, and in that moment, love became a curse. Evelyn gasped as the memory shattered. She fell to her knees on the cold stone floor of the present, clutching her head. The air was filled with whispers, Isolde's voice and her own, tangled like a prayer turned to ash. "You betrayed him," the voice said. "You broke the vow first." "No," Evelyn cried. "He asked me. He wanted. You killed him, Isolde." The words struck her like lightning. Images flashed, a dagger, Oren's eyes wide with shock, the roses screaming as blood splattered across their petals. The past and present collided. She stumbled to her feet, trembling. The moonlight through the window turned crimson, painting the room in shades of nightmare. Oren stood in the doorway. He looked at her not as a stranger, not even as Evelyn, but as her. "You remember," he said quietly. She could barely speak. "It was me," she whispered. "I was the one who cursed us." Oren's expression softened, filled with something that looked like mercy and grief. "We both did," he said. "Love cannot exist without ruin. We bound each other to this fate." He stepped closer, his voice barely a breath. "But now, you have a choice." Evelyn's heart trembled. What choice? The moon will complete its cycle at dawn. If you wish, you can end this, forever. One life must be given, one soul must fade, and if I do nothing, then we begin again, Oren said, as we always do. The clock struck midnight. The crimson light deepened, spilling across the floor like wine. Evelyn looked toward the mirror. Her reflection was gone now, replaced by darkness that seemed to breathe. In that darkness, Isolde's voice whispered one last time, "Love him, or end him." Either way, the moon will have its due. Oren reached out his hand. His eyes, silver and sorrowful, met hers across the centuries. "Choose," he whispered, and as the blood moon burned brighter, Evelyn closed her eyes. The garden outside began to bloom again, black roses swaying beneath the red sky. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled like a heartbeat. The night itself seemed to wait. The moon hung low, swollen and red, trembling over the garden like an open wound. Every petal, every leaf seemed to glow with its light. The roses had stopped swaying. They listened now, as though the night itself knew a decision was about to be made. Inside the manor, silence ruled. The clock had stopped. Even the fire dared not breathe. Evelyn stood at the center of the room, her pale hands trembling around the same silver dagger that had once ended a life and begun a curse. Oren faced her across the fading light, his silver eyes filled with centuries of grief and tenderness. "The moon is full," he said softly. "Whatever we do now, it will bind us again, or free us both." Evelyn's voice trembled. "And if I cannot choose?" "Then fate will choose for you," Oren whispered. The moonlight deepened. Shadows lengthened like living things curling along the walls, whispering in voices that were not human. The reflection in the mirror flickered, Evelyn's face blurring with Isolde's, the two souls merging like smoke and flame. "You loved me once," the reflection said. "You killed me once," Evelyn whispered back. Oren stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "And still, after all this time, I would choose you again." The memories came in waves now. She remembered the night she betrayed him, not out of malice, but fear. Oren had begun to change, his hunger deepening, his warmth fading. She thought killing him would free them both. Instead, it trapped them forever. She fell to her knees. "I can't do it again," she whispered. "I can't lose you again." Oren knelt beside her. His hand brushed her cheek, cold but gentle. "Then don't," he said. "Let me go instead." "No." "Evelyn," his voice broke. "I was born of her curse. You were born of her soul. Only one of us was ever meant to live." He guided her hand, placing the dagger between them. The silver caught the light. It shimmered like a tear. "If you love me," he said, "end it." The red moonlight painted their faces in crimson. Evelyn looked at him, her heart shattering under the weight of centuries. "You've waited all this time," she said, "hoping I would remember?" "Not hoping," he replied, "knowing." A tear slipped down her cheek, pale and luminous. It fell upon the dagger's blade, making it gleam brighter than the moon. Evelyn lifted it slowly. The air trembled. The roses outside began to whisper, their petals trembling as though in prayer. "Oren," she whispered. "It's all right," he said. "This time do not let it break you." She pressed the blade to his chest, and for a moment everything stopped. The fire froze in place. The wind fell silent. Even time itself seemed to pause and watch. "I love you," she said. "I know." The dagger sank deep. Oren didn't flinch. He only smiled, softly, peacefully, as though he had finally woken from a dream that had lasted too long. The blood that flowed from his heart shimmered silver, not red. It glowed like starlight, wrapping around her hands before fading into nothingness. When the moonlight touched him again, he was gone. No body, no shadow, only a faint whisper in the air, and a single white rose blooming where he had fallen. Evelyn stood there, trembling. The dagger slipped from her fingers. Her tears fell soundlessly onto the floor. And then, silence. Real silence. For the first time in centuries, the manor felt empty, but free. The roses outside turned white one by one until the entire garden glowed pale beneath the fading moon. Evelyn walked out barefoot into the dawn, her gown trailing behind her like mist. The sun, real sunlight, touched her face for the first time in lifetimes. It was warm. It was kind. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Rest now, my love." And as she spoke, the wind carried his voice, faint but smiling, until the next moon, my heart. The story faded into morning. The garden stood still. And somewhere, in a world beyond time, a new rose began to bloom. Silver at its core, red at its edges. A reminder that love, even when broken, never truly dies.